Travelers who merely judge from the physiognomy of the Indians are tempted to believe that it is rare to see old men among them. In fact, without consulting parish registers, which in warm regions are devoured by the ants every 20 or 30 years, it is very difficult to form any idea of the age of the Indians. They themselves are completely ignorant of it. Their head never becomes gray. It is infinitely more rare to find an Indian than a black with gray hairs, and the want of a beard gives the former a continual air of youth. The skin of the Indians is also less subject to wrinkles. Humboldt often saw in Mexico, in the temperate zone halfway up the Cordillera, natives and especially women, 100 years of age. This old age was generally comfortable for the Mexican and Peruvian Indians, preserved their muscular strength to the last. While Humboldt was at Lima, the Indian Hilaro Pari died at the village of Guachiquata at the age of 143. He remained united in marriage for 90 years to an Indian in the name of Andrea Aleazar, who attained the age of 117 years. This old Peruvian went at the age of 130 from 3 to 4 leagues daily on foot. He became blind 13 years after his death, and of 12 children left behind him but one daughter of 77 years of age. The copper-colored Indians enjoy one great physical advantage, which is undoubtedly owing to the great simplicity in which their ancestors lived for thousands of years. They are subject to almost no deformity. Humboldt never saw a hunchbacked Indian, and it was extremely rare to see one who squinted, or was lame in the arm or leg. In the countries where the inhabitants suffer from goiter, it never prevails among the Indians, and seldom among the mulattoes. The Indians of Mexico adhered to the ancient customs, manners, and opinions, especially the religious ones, with great obstinacy. The introduction of Christianity into the country had no other effect than substituting new ceremonies for the old, the symbols of a gentle and humane religion for the ceremonies of a sanguinary worship. They received from the hands of their conquerors new laws, new divinities. Their vanquished gods appeared to them to yield to the old gods of the strangers. In such a complicated mythology as that of the Mexicans, it is easy to find out an affinity between the divinities of Aztlan and the divinity of East. Cortez very artfully took advantage of a popular tradition according to the Spaniards, that were merely the descendants of King Quetzalcoatl, who left Mexico for countries situated in the east, to carry among them civilization and laws. The ritual books composed by the Indians in the hieroglyphics at the beginning of the conquest, several fragments of which Humboldt produced while in Mexico, show that at the period of Christianity was confounded with the Mexican mythology. The Holy Ghost is identified with the sacred eagle of the Aztecs. The missionaries not only tolerated but even favored to a certain extent the amalgamation of ideas, by means of which the Christian worship was more easily introduced among the natives. They persuaded them that the gospel had, in very remote times, had already preached in America, and they investigated its traces in the Aztec ritual with the same ardor which the learned, who in our days engage in the study of the Sanskrit, display in discussing the analogy between the Greek mythology and that of the Ganges and the Barrampooter. The Indians knew nothing of the religion beyond the exterior forms of worship. Fond of whatever connected with a prescribed order of ceremonies, they found in the Christian religion particular enjoyments, the festivals of the church, the fireworks, which with they were accompanied, the processions mingled with dance and whimsical disguises. Were a most fertile form of amusement for them. In these festivals, their national character was displayed in all its individuality. Everywhere, the Christian rites assumed the shades of the country where they had been transplanted. In the Philippine and Marina Islands, the natives of the Malay race have incorporated them with the ceremonies which are peculiar to themselves, and the province of Pasto. On the ridge of the Cordilleras of the Andes, Humboldt saw Indians masked and adorned with small tinkling bells perform savage dances around the altar. While a monk of St. Francis elevated the host, the Indians were fond of painting and carving on wood or stone. Humboldt was astonished at what they were able to execute with a bad knife on the hardest wood. They were particularly fond of painting images and carving statues of saints. They had been servilely imitating for 300 years the models which the Europeans imported with them at the conquest. This imitation was derived from a religious principle of a very remote origin. In Mexico, as in Hindustan, it was not allowable in the faithful to change the figure of their idols in the highest degree. Whatever made up parts of the Aztec or Hindu ritual was subjected to immutable laws. The Christian images have preserved in Mexico a part of the stiffness and harshness of the features that had characterized the hieroglyphical pictures of the age of the Montezuma. Returning from Moran and Ria del Monte in July, Humboldt projected a visit to the mines of Guaxato. These celebrated mines, which were among the richest in the country, lay to the north of the capital. On his way thither, he stopped to examine the canal of Huehuetoca. From the valley of Tula, through which this great canal ran, he proceeded to the plain of Querétaro, passing the mountains of Quapluapan and the town of San Juan del Rio, till he came to the city of Querétaro. He remained there for a few days to make an astronomical observation, and started for Guanajuato, stopping on his way to the mines of Solitar, Chulitan, Las Aguas, Mancani, El Doctor, and San Cristobal. The mine of Venezuela, Sinia, the most celebrated of all the mines of Guaxato and the richest in Mexico, although it had been worked by the Indians and early Spanish settlers, was not much wrought until towards the end of the 18th century. In 1760, a Spaniard named Obregon began to work a vein on a part of the old mine, which was till then believed to be destitute of metals. He was without fortune, but as he had the reputation of being a worthy man, he found friends who from time to time advanced him small sums to carry on his operations. In 1766, the works were over 250 feet deep, yet the expenses greatly surpassed the metallic produce. The The next year, he entered into a partnership with a petty merchant of Reyes named Otaro, and in a short time the silver began to be more plentiful. As the pit grew deeper, it grew richer. In 1771, they drew enormous masses of sulfuretted metal, silver, mixed with native and red silver. From that time, it yielded over $1 million annually. When Oberdron, or as he was afterwards called, the Count of Venecia, began to work over the vine above the ravine of San Javier, goats were feeding on the hill tops. 10 years after, there was a town there was containing 7 or 8,000 inhabitants. At the time of Humboldt's visit, the population of Guanajuato was 70,600. 29,600 of the number were miners. He remained there and in this neighborhood 2 months pursuing his scientific studies, now on the mountains making astronomical observations, and now in the mines wrestling from nature the secret of her richest treasures. We shall not pursue in this various excursions among the mines, but give here the results of his observations on the mineral wealth of Mexico. The quantity of silver annually extracted from the Mexican mines was 10 times greater than that at the time furnished by all the mines in Europe. Gold, however, was not more abundant than in Hungary or Transylvania, for the most part extracted from alluvial grounds by means of washing. It was occasionally found in veins on mountains or of primitive rock. The mines of native gold were more plentiful in Osaka, in gneiss or micaceous rock, slate. This last rock was particularly rich in gold in the mine of Rio San Antonio. It was either found pure or mixed with silver. There was scarcely a silver mine in Mexico that did not contain some gold. The principal vein in the time of Santa Cruz at Villapado was intersected by a great number of small rotten veins of exceeding richness. The archipelago's slime, which these veins were filled with, contained so great a quantity of gold, disseminated in impalpable parcels, that the workmen were compelled to bathe themselves in large vessels when they were left the mine to prevent any of the auriferous clay from being carried off by them on their bodies. Great quantities of silver were derived from ores, such as antimony, arsenical gray copper, sulfuretted silver, muriated silver, prismatic black silver, and red silver. Red silver constituted the greater part of the wealth of Casola, Zolaga, and Sombret. The mine of La Veta Negra near Sombret yielded in 5 or 6 months nearly 70,000 silver marks. Yet it was not one of 100 feet deep. The black silver was common in the mines of Guanajuato, Zacatas, and Rio del Monte. Urquated silver abounded in the mines of Corotse and Cerro San Pedro. At Fresnillo, it was frequently olive green. Superb samples of this color were found in the mines of Valserones, the veins of Simpan. A little to the north of Real del Monte offered a great deal variety of curious minerals, among other chrysoprase and a new species of opal of rare beauty. Humboldt procured one of these opals of great size and carried it with him when he returned to Europe. The mineralogists Karsten in Klaproth described it as a fire opal. Of all the rock formations in Mexico, the Polarific rocks were the richest in gold and silver. Then came primitive slate, gray whack, and alpine limestone. Copper was found in the mines of Ingram and San Juan Guatemala. Tin was sometimes obtained by washing the alluvial lands. Iron, too, was abundant. From Guaxado, Humboldt proceeded in a southerly direction to Salamanca. He stopped at the Salamanca long enough to fix its latitude and longitude, and then continued his journey to Valladolid. The capital of the intendency of that name, Valladolid, was a small city containing only 18,000 inhabitants. Its elevation was 6,400 feet above the sea, yet snow had been known to fall in its streets. It contained nothing but a worthy of notice except an aqueduct and a bishop's palace. From Valladolid he proceeded to Pescaro. Pescaro was situated in the picturesque banks of a little lake at the same name. This lake and the scenery in its vicinity, Humboldt declared, would alone have repaid him for his voyage across the ocean. This city or town of Pescaro contained the ashes of a remarkable man, Vasco de Quirigua, the first bishop of Mexico. He was the benefactor of the Indians in his diocese, whose industry he encouraged, prescribing one particular branch of trade to each village. He died in 1556, but even in Humboldt's time, his memory was venerated by the Indians, who continued to call him their father. The Indians of the province of Valladolid formed three races of different origins. The Tarasques celebrated the 16th century for their gentleness of their manners, for their industry in the mechanical arts, and for the harmony of their language, abounding in vowels. The Otomites, a tribe far behind them in civilization, who spoke a language full of nasal and guttural aspirations. And the Chichimecs, who had persevered the Mexican language. All the south parts of the intendency of Valladolid was inhabited by Indians. The villages, the only white figure to be met with was the cure, and he also was frequently an Indian or mulatto. The benefices were so poor then that the Bishop of Mexico had the greatest difficulty in procuring elastices to settle in a group where Spaniards were almost never spoken, and where, along the coast of the great ocean, the priests were infected by contagious miasma of malignant fevers, frequently died for the exasperation of 7 or 8 months. But the wonder of the intendency of Valladolid, and indeed of Mexico itself, was the remarkable volcano Yolio, which lay a little to the south of Pescaro. The great catastrophe in which the mountain rose from the earth, and by which a considerable extent of the ground totally changed its appearance, is one of the most extraordinary physical revolutions in the history of our planet. Geology points out the ports of the ocean, where at recent epochs within the last 2,000 years, near the Azores in the Aegean Sea, and to the south of Iceland, small volcanic islands have risen above the surface of the water. But it gives us no examples of the formation from the center of 1,000 small burning cones of a mountain of scoriae and ashes, 1,700 feet in height, comparing it only with the level of the old adjoining plains. In the interior of a continent 36 leagues distant from the coast, and more than 42 leagues from every other active volcano. This remarkable phenomenon was sung in hexameter verses by the Jesuit father Rafael Landeviar, a native of Guatemala. It is mentioned by the Abbe Claviergo in the ancient history of his country, and yet till Humboldt visited and described it, it remained unknown to the mineralogists and naturalists of Europe, though it took place not more than 50 years before, and within 6 days' journey of the capital of Mexico. A vast plain extended from the hills of Escargo to near the villages of Tepe and Petalon, both equally celebrated for their fine plantations of cotton. This plain was at most not over 2,600 feet above the level of the sea, in the middle of a tract of ground in which the periphery, with the base of grunstein, predominated basaltic cones appeared, the summits of which were covered with evergreen oaks of a laurel and olive foliage, intermingled with the small palm trees. This beautiful vegetation formed a singular contrast with the aridity of the plain, which was laid waste by the volcanic fire. Till the middle of the 18th century, fields cultivated with sugarcane and indigo occupied the extent of the ground between two brooks called Cutamba and San Pedro. They were bounded by basaltic mountains, of which their structure seemed to indicate that all this country was a very remote period, had already been several times convulsed by volcanoes. These fields, watered by artificial means, belonged to the plantations of San Pedro de Llorio, one of the greatest and richest of the country. In the month of June 1759, a subterraneous sound was heard. Hollow noises of a most alarming nature were accompanied by frequent earthquakes, which succeeded one another for more than 50 or 60 days, to the great consternation of the inhabitants of the plantation. From the beginning of September, everything seemed to announce that the complete reestablishment of the tranquility, when in the night before the 28th and 29th, the horrible subterraneous noise recommenced. The affrighted Indians fled to the mountains of Escargo, a tract of ground from 3 to 4 square miles in extent rose in the shape of a bladder. The bounds of this convulsion were still distinguishable in the fractured strata. The Malpays near its edges were only 39 feet above the old level of the plain, but the convexity of the ground thus thrown up the increased progressivity towards the center of an elevation of about 520 feet. Those who witnessed the great catastrophe from the top of Escargo asserted that flames were seen to issue forth from an extent more than half a square league, that fragments of burning rocks were thrown up to prodigious heights, that through a thick cloud of ashes illuminated by volcanic fire, the softened surface of the earth was seen to swell like an agitated sea. The rivers of Quimada and San Pedro precipitated themselves into burning chasms. The disposition of the water contributed to invigorate the flames, which were distinguishable at Pesquero, though it was situated on the extensive tableland and 4,600 feet elevated above the plains of Jolo. Eruptions of mud and especially of strata of clay enveloping balls of decomposed basalts in concentrical layers appeared to indicate that subterraneous water had no share in producing the extraordinary revolution. Thousands of small cones from 6 to 9 feet in height, called by the Indian ovens, issued forth from the Malpays. Each small cone was a funnel from which a thick vapor ascended to the height of 40 or 50 feet. In many of them, a subterraneous noise was heard, which appeared to announce the proximity of a fluid in illumination.